Hey guys! For today's video, I wanted to go over a game that I've wanted to cover for a while now, and one that surprisingly became one of my favorite games of all time. New Super Mario Bros. Wii. But before I begin, I would like to mention that this video might be a bit different from the previous ones I've made so far. With the prior videos, almost every single game I covered dealt with something that I had little or even zero personal experience with. I covered them because I thought they were either noteworthy, influential, or just interesting games to talk about. But this one's different. This is a game that I actually do have plenty of experience with, one that I've replayed frequently over the years. So this video will be part development deep dive, part game review, and part general commentary. So hopefully you all enjoy it. With the absolute unprecedented and monstrous success of New Super Mario Bros. For the Nintendo DS, it's not really much of a shock that Nintendo would want to make a sequel. Though what was somewhat shocking was how quickly Nintendo would release that sequel, that being only a mere 3 years after the original. If you're raising an eyebrow at the idea of 3 years being a short time to develop a sequel, I would like to remind everyone that before New Super Mario Bros. DS, the last side-scrolling Mario game was released more than 15 years prior. So yes, for a Mario platformer, this was actually on the quicker side. Anyway, Nintendo would make the announcement at E3 2009 and reveal to the world the first trailer for the successor to New Super Mario Bros. DS. Aesthetically, it looked very similar to the original DS game, but with upgraded graphics. The trailer showed off many things you would expect from a sequel, like new levels, mechanics, and power-ups. But also, perhaps the most intriguing new feature, multiple players being able to play the game simultaneously. Furthermore, this sequel to New Super Mario Bros. DS would not actually appear on the DS, but instead on Nintendo's console counterpart, the Wii. And thus, the New Super Mario Bros. Game for the Wii would aptly be named New Super Mario Bros. Wii. Nintendo doesn't really have a history of being very creative with their game titles. Also surprisingly, it would be released in just under 6 months of its unveiling. For comparison, New Super Mario Bros. DS took 2 years from reveal to release. Regardless, few of us were complaining. Alright, so let's start from the beginning. Development for the game would start shortly after completion of New Super Mario Bros. DS. Unsurprisingly, New Super Mario Bros. Wii would be developed by essentially the same team that did the DS game. 3 of the people involved were the original creators of the very first Super Mario game, Shigeru Miyamoto, Takashi Tezuka, and Toshihiko Nakago, the Golden Triangle, as the late Nintendo president Satoru Iwata called them, and as I covered on my video on the DS game. While the trio were part of the development team for the DS version, they took a mostly hands-off approach and let the younger designers and programmers do all the heavy lifting. Looking at the sales of the DS game, it turned out to be quite the success. That's an understatement, of course. It was tremendously and insanely successful, selling far beyond what any Mario platformer that wasn't previously included as a pack-in with the console. So, from a financial perspective, the development team was no doubt quite pleased. However, from a creative perspective, they were less than satisfied. The team felt that the DS game had under-delivered in many respects. One area that was a sore point for Miyamoto and Tezuka in particular was the game's difficulty level. So with the desire to rectify the previous game's flaws, and also possibly due to the fact that this time, the sequel was going to be a console game, and thus be a much larger and more ambitious project, all 3 apparently decided to involve themselves much deeper in the development, offering much more of a guiding hand to the younger developers this time around. Nakago, who was the programming director for the DS game, was interestingly enough now the director of level design for this one, which is kind of a cool shift in position, going from programming to level design. You don't see that very often. Tezuka went from general producer to the closer role of regular producer, and specifically focused on game difficulty. And lastly, Miyamoto, who had almost no involvement on the DS title, would now be broadly overseeing all aspects of game development, stating at one point that this was the most direct involvement he's had with the 2D Mario's game design since Super Mario World. In addition, this title would also receive the help of other lesser known but nearly equally talented pillars of Mario platforming, designers like Shigefumi Hino, Kenta Usui, and Yasuhisa Yamamura, who would be involved with initial planning, map design, and level design. This was all seemingly great news for Mario fans, and it very well could be this more direct involvement of the veteran Mario developers that would make this game a vastly superior experience compared to its predecessor. But I don't want to ignore the other, younger members of the development team who absolutely had critical roles to play as well. Shigeyuki Asuke, for instance, the man who led development for the DS version, returned once again to helm this title as lead director. While the members of the Golden Triangle took a more hands-on role this time, Asuke was still the main man who would be taking care of the day-to-day duties of a game director and would focus all his energy on this single title. His main development lieutenants would include Takayuki Ikaku, who would be in charge of stage creation, Eiji Mukao, who handled landscape and background graphics, and Sanai Uchida, who was primarily responsible for sound programming and sound effects. And as far as music goes, the legendary Mario composer Koji Kondo, who worked on every mainline Mario game since the original, including the DS version, would also return to be a part of the sound team for the Wii version. Unfortunately, for this project, he was only going to be participating in an advisory role and didn't compose any tracks this time around. Ironically, he seemed to be the only major Legacy member to have less involvement with this game than the DS version. Instead, the music would be handled by newcomers Ryo Nagamatsu and Shiho Fuji, both of whom had only been hired by Nintendo just a few years earlier. New Super Mario Bros. Wii was a massive upgrade in pretty much every area that I can think of. But let's start with the visuals. When Nintendo revealed the game, it was a surprise to many of us for a few reasons. One of those reasons being that it used the exact same art style, controls, and physics of a prior game, something that was practically unheard of at the time for Nintendo. The last game Nintendo attempted something like this was all the way back with Super Mario Bros. 2 for the NES. No, not that one. There we go. That was the original Super Mario Bros. 2. This was released only in Japan. It was basically an expansion pack of the original, but one that was designed to be significantly more difficult. In fact, so difficult that Nintendo of America didn't want to bother releasing it in the US because they thought American gamers wouldn't be able to handle it. Though they actually would eventually release it later on, under the localized name, which many of you might be more familiar with, Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, on the Super Mario All-Stars collection for the Super Nintendo. Anyway, the point is, this was an extremely rare creative choice, and Nintendo's decision to go down this route caught a lot of us off guard. The Wii game basically took the DS version's art style and copied it wholesale. But unlike Super Mario Bros. 2, which was released on the same console as the original, and for all intents and purposes, looked pretty much identical to the original, New Super Mario Bros. Wii had the benefit of releasing on much more powerful hardware than its predecessor. As a result, it used much better, higher quality models and textures. I'm sorry to say that the original game on the DS was not particularly pleasant to look at. Oh sure, maybe it was fine given that it was on a low-powered handheld, but it was very hard to ignore the N64/PS1 levels of fidelity and performance, and without the benefit of things like texture filtering to help ease some of the more uglier aspects. An intolerable offense for me personally. It just looked like a pixelated mess, even on the DS's tiny screen. Basically, the hardware was simply far too weak to do the game justice. Thankfully, the Wii version didn't have to deal with this particular drawback, or at the very least, not nearly to the same degree. While the Wii was by no means a graphical powerhouse compared to its rivals during that generation, it was at the very least a tremendous step up from the capabilities of the DS, probably being anywhere between 10 to 20 times more powerful than the DS. The Wii's significantly superior processing power was able to get rid of virtually all the flaws of its predecessor. Character models were much more smooth and rounded, textures were more detailed and higher resolution, and even lighting was a bit more realistic and improved dramatically. The game didn't just appear far more respectable, but at times it was even, dare I say, impressive? I know a lot of people aren't really big fans of the new Super Mario Bros. Art style, and I can totally understand that. But I do think a lot of that has to do with the fact that since the DS game, We've had tons and tons of subsequent Mario games that use basically the same style. So I think a large part of people's distaste is because they've seen it too many times and we're all just tired of it. But while I don't think this game might win many awards in the visual department, back in 2009, I thought this game was certainly one of the more pleasing and occasionally genuinely great looking Wii games. I've always loved the way the light glistened on these oscillating crystal platforms, the way the sand on these sand geysers was animated. Some surfaces had excellent texture work, possibly even utilizing some bump mapping here and there. And actually, on that note, I discovered one very cool thing only recently while researching for this video. And it was that these volcanic boulders falling from the sky might actually have used normal mapping, a more advanced technique at creating 3D depth than bump mapping. It was a feature that was common starting from the 7th generation hardware, like the Xbox 360 and the PS3, but practically non-existent on the Wii, as it's a fairly computationally expensive technique for low-powered pre-7th gen consoles like the Wii. I never would have expected a game like New Super Mario Bros. Wii, of all games, to have such a feature, even if it was used in extremely limited amounts. Hell, I don't even think that any of the Galaxy games use normal maps. Though if anybody in the comments knows more about this sort of thing, please feel free to correct me. On top of all the neat technical effects, I also really like some of the minor stylistic flourishes here and there, like these magic fire blasts from the Koopa Kids' wands, or these trippy platforms fighting Kamek. Now, is it visually mind-blowing like, say, Super Mario Galaxy? No, of course not, but I don't say that as a knock against the game. The Galaxy games are in a league of their own when it comes to both art design and graphical capabilities. Few games of any kind would be able to compete with them. But New Super Mario Bros. Wii is honestly a perfectly admirable effort. It's certainly more conservative and safe than Galaxy, but it gets the job done quite nicely. It has a very nice, clean, functional, and vibrant art style. If Galaxy was a 10 in that department, I'd be more than fine giving New Super Mario Wii an 8, or even an 8.5 when it's at its best. And I think that's a great accomplishment for a game like this. One minor issue I do have with the game's graphics is that the character models are still, even for Wii, a bit too low poly, and also seem to have this very plasticky looking sheen to them that I'm not a big fan of. On the other hand, New Super Mario Bros. U on the Wii U wasn't really that much better, and the Wii U was a whole generational leap in power. But like I said, it's not a huge deal in the grand scheme of things, because overall, I do think it's a legitimately good looking game for the Wii. Now let's talk about the power-ups. The power-ups were another major upgrade from the DS version. I'll be honest, I was not at all a fan of the selection of new power-ups in that game. I thought both the Mega Mushroom and Mini Mushroom were too gimmicky, and the Blue Shell power-up, while kind of fun, was a bit too unruly for my liking. Now compare those with the Wii selection of power-ups, and everything's a major step up. First, I have to start with the power-up which, in my opinion, had been long overdue, the Ice Flower. Similar to the Fire Flower, except with, ice. The Ice Flower allows Mario to shoot balls of ice, which freezes enemies in their tracks. Once they're frozen, they can be picked up and thrown at other enemies, or could be used as platforms in water. Definitely one of my favorite power-ups in the game. And I know what some of you nerds are going to say in the comments. But wait, the Ice Flower was already a power-up in Galaxy, a whole 2 years ago. And yes, while that is true, it's also true that the Ice Flower in Galaxy didn't operate in the same way that it does in New Super Mario Wii. The Ice Flower in Galaxy not only gives Mario a completely different form, but his powers work in a completely different manner as well. Instead of shooting balls of ice that can freeze enemies, Mario's ice powers only work on water when he makes contact with his body. He can't freeze enemies like he can with the Ice Flower in New Super Mario Wii. Now don't get me wrong, I do think the Ice Flower in Galaxy is pretty cool in its own right, but it's a completely different kettle of fish. The Ice Flower in New Super Mario Wii works in the way that one would think an Ice Flower would work. Anyway, also new to the series is the Propeller Suit, which serves as a customary air-based power-up. Like its name suggests, it propels Mario vertically into the air and lets him decelerate safely on the way down. Personally, I don't think it's nearly as fun as either the Raccoon power-up in Mario 3 or the Cape in Mario World, but it's enjoyable enough. I don't love it, but I don't hate it either. Basically, it's fine. And last but not least, we have the Penguin Suit power-up. This one's interesting because Nintendo did something that they don't normally do. They introduced a new power-up that's actually very similar to one that already exists. This particular power-up is pretty much identical to the Ice Flower, but with some additional abilities. Mario can still freeze enemies, but is also now able to walk on ice without slipping, as well as being able to slide across icy floors. Basically, the penguin suit is to the Ice Flower, what the Tanuki suit in Mario 3 was to the raccoon power-up. The sliding mechanic is really fun, but my only issue with it is that you can only do so in levels that happen to have icy floors in them, which unfortunately leaves out most levels in the game. While I do like the penguin suit overall, my only other major issue is that it looks really lame. But then again, so does the propeller suit, so... Oh, also, one power-up does in fact return from the DS game, and that's the mini mushroom, for those of you who care. I wasn't too pleased to see it again, but on the plus side, it didn't show up very often. But you can't talk about a Mario game without going over one of its greatest strengths, the level design. Another area that was a huge step up from the DS game, and I mean that literally. The levels are far larger and more intricate, and they're much more fun to explore. The game is initially made up of 8 different worlds you have to traverse, all identical to the DS game, which include many of the typical Mario staples. World 1 consists of grassy plains, World 2 is in a desert, World 3 takes place in a snow-covered forest, World 4 is an archipelago of tropical islands, World 5 seems to be a rainforest-type location, World 6 takes place in the mountains, World 7 takes you above the clouds, and finally, World 8, a region filled with lava and active volcanoes, is where Bowser resides. The levels cover a wide variety of terrain and obstacles, and have some particularly imaginative ideas and gimmicks. Things like the aforementioned sand geysers, large floating balls of water, and skeleton platform roller coasters make this one of the most enjoyable and challenging games in the series. Like pretty much all prior Mario games, they start off fairly easy, but become progressively more difficult, with quite a few levels giving you far more trouble than you'd expect, but usually in a good way. Like the DS game, each level consists of 3 star coins, interspersed in cleverly hidden areas. These are special coins that, when all 3 are discovered, will unlock alternative paths to new levels and more content. Most of them are fairly easy to find, but quite a few of them will surprisingly have you racking your brain trying to figure out where the hell they're located. As mentioned, the game has all the same 8 worlds from the original, but once you collect all the star coins from every level and every world, the Wii version rewards you with the secret bonus 9th world, the Star World. Here, you get some of the hardest and most challenging levels in the entire game. They're also some of my personal favorite levels from Mario platformers in general. An incredibly compelling additional incentive to go back and explore every inch of every level. The overworld is also filled with an assortment of overworld hazards and toad houses. The red toad houses offer you a chance to earn more power-ups, and they're basically the matching minigame from Mario 3, which, while not new, is still fun to play. The green toad houses offer you opportunities for 1-ups, and unlike the red toad houses, do in fact have a brand new gimmick, where you're fired out of a cannon and have to aim correctly to get the highest number of lives. These are some of my favorite minigames in the series. I thought they were pretty nice additions that, for the most part, were genuinely fun little diversions. One kind of unfortunate thing though, is how they treat Yoshi in this game. Oh yeah, that's right, Yoshi's back. And that was initially great news. Everyone loves Yoshi, right? Except his implementation in this game was less than ideal, shall we say. Whereas in Super Mario World you could ride Yoshi around pretty much everywhere except the ghost houses, fortresses, and castles, in New Super Mario Wii, Yoshis are limited to the levels they appear in, and they only appear in a tiny handful of levels to begin with. This was a very bizarre decision in my opinion. I mean, he appears on the damn box art. Granted, in the grand scheme of things, that doesn't really hurt my overall enjoyment of the game that much, but it is very disappointing. Yoshi deserved better, damn it. But of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about arguably New Super Mario Wii's defining feature, and that's the multiplayer system. For Miyamoto, this was a long-time dream, one that he had from the very beginning of the series apparently, and one that he was finally able to achieve with this game. According to Miyamoto, The main reason it took so long to get to this point was because none of the hardware that previous 2D Mario games ran on were powerful enough to run 4-player simultaneous play. The DS game did have a 2-player versus mode with Mario and Luigi, where you compete for a number of big stars, but it was extremely limited, only being able to be played in 5 pre-selected levels. But with the Wii version, this was the first time ever where 4 players could play through every single level in the entire game simultaneously. This is the first Mario platformer since Super Mario Bros. 2 where you could play as 4 different characters. In that game, you could choose either Mario, Luigi, Toad, or Princess Peach. And here in New Super Mario Wii, you can similarly choose between Mario, Luigi, Toad, and a different colored Toad. Wait, why don't they have Peach as a playable character? Well, 1, because she gets kidnapped in the beginning of the game, and 2, more interestingly in fact, because, and I'm not making this up, apparently programming the physics for her dress would be too computationally intensive for the Wii. Look, I've heard over the years that cloth physics are notoriously difficult to program for, so I believe what Miyamoto says. However, that's still a hell of a reason to forego an entire character, particularly one that I think lots of people, specifically girls, would have loved to play as. Because I would think that you could have some fairly easy workarounds. Like, for example, not have the dress react too accurately to real-world physics. I mean, this is a Mario game after all, not Crisis. Or, failing that, this issue could be avoided entirely by simply having Peach wear pants.
Princess Peach!
Yeah.
Give it her pants!
Okay, never mind. Alas, fans of Princess Peach sadly had to wait one more generation before a Nintendo console had enough processing power to allow her to save the Mushroom Kingdom while also being able to wear a dress. Anyway, I genuinely like a lot about New Super Mario Wii, but the multiplayer mode may have been the most enjoyable innovation Nintendo's introduced to the series up to that point. And hell, probably since. 4-player competitive play can be insanely chaotic, but in the best way possible. I had an absolute blast playing the game with my friends. Being able to complete the end of a level without killing your companions, either accidentally or intentionally, was both challenging and fun. And I would argue that it easily ranks alongside games like Smash Bros. And Mario Kart as one of the best multiplayer games Nintendo has ever produced. What was an incredibly fresh feature at the time has now become a standard gameplay mode for all subsequent Mario platformers since. Even some of the 3D ones. And for good reason, it's a fantastic feature. Like I mentioned earlier, the music for this game would be headed by 2 newcomers. Fuji is a bit of an interesting case, because she was a very recent Nintendo hire, arriving at the company in 2007, just 2 years before New Super Mario Wii was released. She worked on just 2 Nintendo titles prior, Wii Fit and Animal Crossing City Folk. To be able to work on a mainline Mario game as one of the lead composers so quickly is a pretty impressive achievement. Nagamatsu is a similar case. He joined Nintendo just a full year prior to Fuji in 2006. He too worked his way up the ranks fairly quickly, working on titles like Wii Play and Mario Kart Wii, before landing the role with New Super Mario Wii, which was only his 5th title. So, as far as the actual music goes, I hate to say it, but I feel like the music is probably the weakest aspect of the game. And that's very unfortunate, because to me, music is an incredibly important part of the video game experience, and especially when it comes to a mainline Mario game. The series was famous for having some of the most memorable music, not just from Nintendo, but in gaming in general. It's one of the reasons why many of the classic Mario games are still looked back so fondly. So let's get into the problems with the music for New Super Mario Wii. First off, a lot of the tracks are just slightly modified versions of tracks that already appeared in the DS game, which didn't exactly have an award-winning score, and the brand new original songs are nothing to write home about either. The themes are overall decent, but not particularly remarkable in my opinion. They're good enough that they get the job done, and honestly, after a while of listening, you do get used to them. The tracks are respectable enough, I'd say, But I don't think anybody would choose any of these songs to appear on any Best of Mario music list. In fact, to add insult to injury, I think this may be one of the few areas where I feel like New Super Mario DS, shockingly enough, did a superior job. But again, I think the soundtrack's an okay package overall. Sadly, some other aspects of the game are also a mixed bag. In New Super Mario Wii, we finally see the return of the Koopa Kids for the first time in nearly 2 decades, and that was definitely something that seemed like a big deal at the time. And while I definitely appreciated them coming back, sadly, these boss battles left a lot to be desired. You battle each Koopa Kid in 2 stages, once midway through the current world, and once more at the very end, with the second encounter adding a new gimmick to make the battle more difficult. But in both cases, the boss battles seem to be fairly easy, without much of a sense of challenge. They're pretty repetitive, especially the first round. Jump on their heads, avoid them sliding on the floor, rinse and repeat 3 times. Their second stage battles are definitely tougher and more interesting to be sure, but they also don't pose any real level of difficulty either. Again, as a Mario traditionalist, while I'm happy that the Koopa Kids returned, they all seemed fairly boring for the most part. I mean, overall, it's not a huge deal, and it doesn't really dampen my enjoyment of the game as a whole, but it would have been nice if Nintendo put in a bit more effort on these. That being said, in addition to the Koopa Kids, you also fight Bowser Jr. He appears several times throughout the game in his airship, very reminiscent of the airships from Mario 3, and each encounter has a new wacky contraption he fights in. These boss battles are much more creative and much more enjoyable than the ones already mentioned. I was actually genuinely impressed and liked them quite a bit, and I say that as no fan of Bowser Jr., so good on him. And finally, for a game that a lot of people have written off as being very generic and safe, I would argue that it has, surprisingly enough, possibly the best final Bowser battle in the entire series. And I don't just mean that for the 2D games, but the 3D ones as well. Yeah, that's right. It's a bold claim to be sure, but one I'm fully willing to go to bat for. The designers came up with an idea for the final boss battle that was somehow both a new direction, but also in a sense, a seemingly obvious one. So when you first encounter Bowser, you simply have to activate a switch behind him, which will cause the bridge he's standing on to collapse, a la the original Super Mario Bros. Once you do, it looks like that's the end of that. But of course, in typical Nintendo fashion, this turns out to be yet another fake out, and Kamek once again shows up and performs a magical spell to turn Bowser gigantic. And it's at this point where the true final boss battle really begins. And the genius of this final encounter was that the designers basically made it a full-on platforming stage. Bowser chases you throughout the level, and you have to avoid his onslaught, while also using his attacks to help destroy parts of the level so that it opens up a path for you to proceed. It's utterly brilliant in its simplicity, and in my opinion, no final Bowser battle in any game has matched it since. Admittedly, this was going to be a tough act to follow, but even then, I'm shocked at how certain Mario games in the series just absolutely whiffed in comparison. One of the absolute worst culprits was New Super Mario Wii's immediate successor, New Super Mario Bros. U. This is what that game's final Bowser battle is like. Yeah, that's it. It's Bowser, and he's really big again. Just like before, except just standing on a long flat surface, no kick-ass platforming edition here. Just one large Bowser. And it's not like it's a particularly difficult battle either. On the contrary, it's ridiculously easy. Bowser looks far more intimidating than he actually turns out to be. It's legitimately one of the most boring, least creative boss battles I've ever seen in a Mario game. It's like the design team just ran out of ideas at the end, shrugged their shoulders, and said, how about we just make Bowser big again, and called it a day. I found the final battle so underwhelming, in fact, that it really diminished the overall experience of New Super Mario U for me, and it's the main reason why I ultimately ranked the Wii game higher overall. It's all the more disappointing considering the rest of that game is pretty fantastic, and even better in a lot of ways than the Wii version. So anyway, the game would release on November 9th, 2009 to immediate success. In its first week, it sold nearly 1 million units in Japan. It was the fastest selling Wii game, beating the previous record holder, Super Smash Bros. Brawl, which sold a little over 800,000. It was also tracking slightly better than its DS predecessor, which sold just a little under 900,000 in its first week. By the end of 2009, it sold almost 2.5 million units in Japan. In the US, the game sold almost 1.4 million units throughout November, becoming the third best-selling game for the month, behind only Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 for both the Xbox 360 and the PS3. And then in December, it would actually surpass Modern Warfare for each individual console, being the #1 title that month, for a worldwide total of 10 million for the end of the year, surpassing Super Mario Galaxy's lifetime totals for that point in only 45 days. And as of the most up-to-date sales figures, New Super Mario Bros. Wii has sold over a staggering 30 million units, just barely getting within striking distance of the sales of the equally impressive DS game. While the DS version did come out on top, one could make the argument that the Wii game's performance was much more impressive, as it had sold almost the same amount as the DS game, but with the user base that had 55 million fewer units of hardware to play it on. Either way, I'd imagine Nintendo was fairly satisfied with its performance. Looking back, it's truly stunning how my impression of the DS game versus the Wii game has been night and day. I was hyped to hell when the DS game was announced, and was eagerly anticipating it every day until release. But that game ended up disappointing me greatly. Whereas with the Wii game, while there wasn't nearly the same level of initial hype, the final game was orders of magnitude far more impressive and satisfying. While I don't think New Super Mario Bros. Wii might necessarily be as revolutionary as some other mainline Mario titles, it's certainly more evolutionary than revolutionary. You don't need to be revolutionary in order to be a great game. It still brings many innovations to the Mario series, as well as some brilliant new power-ups and level design. While it uses the template of the DS version, the Wii game is a masterful refinement of it. It corrects basically all the flaws of the DS game, and it improves the overall game in almost every way imaginable. As a whole, it might not reach the same heights of something like Super Mario Galaxy or Super Mario 3 or World, but when the game's good, it's damn good. When the game is firing on all cylinders, it is absolutely worthy of being included in the pantheon of the greatest Mario games. This is the game that New Super Mario Bros. DS should have been. I feel like New Super Mario Wii would have made a much bigger splash if the DS version didn't release first. It seems like it wound up taking the wind out of the Wii version sales. New Super Mario Bros. Wii, as great as it was, did not have the hype cycle that came with being the first Mario platformer in 15 years. Honestly, with how much the Wii game took from the original, it almost seems like kind of an apology from Nintendo for their first attempt, and they wanted to get this one right. I played New Super Mario Bros. DS immediately when it came out, and I haven't touched it since. And furthermore, I have no desire to go back to it anytime soon. Whereas with New Super Mario Bros. Wii, I played it far more frequently throughout the years, and for a long while, even had a tradition of playing it once per year during Thanksgiving, the time when it was originally released. In terms of overall enjoyment, I would rank New Super Mario Bros. Wii as the third best side-scrolling Mario platformer, right under Super Mario World and Super Mario 3. However, I will say that, in a few areas, like level design, I would rank it above both those games, which again is a stellar achievement. And so, New Super Mario Bros. Wii absolutely deserves to be in the pantheon with the greatest Mario platformers. If you haven't played the game yet, I would absolutely recommend you do so. Thanks for watching.